What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 2 live stream for the PGA Championship. Going to get you ready for all your Round 2 lineups with a look at the weather report, some strategy for Friday's exposure, any questions down in the chat, as well as a look at some of the ideas I'm looking at for my player pool and some strategy there on DraftKings too. So a little taste of everything and anything on top of that you're curious about, just let me know down in the chat. But I see we already got some regulars down there. My guy Alan, Jake, also Goku Lex there every single live stream. Welcome on into all my sweaty tryhards, and hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. It's a lot of fun watching Quail Hollow. It is a big boy golf course, as some people would dub it, and that last 3-hole stretch, 16 through 18, I had that stream on for the last 3 hours straight. There was just carnage galore with those 3 holes, and inject that into my veins over the next few days. But here in this live stream, like I said, we're going to get ready for all of that moving day action, and for Showdown, which is a little bit different than the main slate. So if you're somebody that's newer to the PGA DFS streets, first time dipping their toes into the Showdown waters, just know that we're going to talk about some of the differences here on the stream, but you definitely want to treat it with a little bit of a different mindset than what you do for main slate. Rather than looking at it for a 4-round sample size, you embrace the variance, all the kind of chaos we get in an 18-hole sample size, and you take a lot of pivots in rounds 2 and 3 Showdown. So we'll mention all of that throughout the live stream, but welcome on in. We got Justin down there, Carter, C. Floyd as well. We got Wayne there as well, calling this the Slapdick Open. After round 1, yeah, a lot of weird names towards the top, but that's why you've got 72 holes. And we got Carter and D-Man down there too. Anything you guys are curious about, feel free to go ahead and let me know, but we're going to go ahead and get this thing rocking. So the first thing to note would be the split between the morning and afternoon, which was about 0.3 shots between the morning and afternoon wave. And it's not substantial enough to say that you had to stack one side or the other, especially when you look at the top level scores. Johnny Vegas, for example, was on the PM side, which played that 0.3 strokes harder. A lot of the other guys at -4, -5 were also on the wrong side of the draw. And for a while, when you had this whole group of guys at -4 that were all AM wave, I thought that that side might get the better conditions, but it was pretty flat even with the winds kicking up. And what you'll see here with the forecast is that the PM had about 3-4 miles an hour higher winds. Tomorrow afternoon, it's looking like the same kind of situation. And this forecast, the HRRR on the windy.com, going to be a lot more accurate than what we have here in Data Golf. It's calling for the similar kind of story. And really, the winds aren't truly kicking up until closer to 4 to 6 p.m., which is when some players are going to be done with like half of their PM wave rounds. And it's only going to impact the last 6 to 9 holes for players anyways. So I would say that the weather situation is shaping up to be the exact same. Probably not a massive difference between the morning and afternoon. It does look a little bit cooler towards the start of play tomorrow morning, but 70 degrees is moderate. It's nothing to worry about when it comes to scoring conditions. In fact, 70 degrees might be favorable over the 90 degrees and hot in the afternoon. But with the winds kicking up a little bit, I would imagine the scoring average does favor the AM side, but it's not going to be a massive half a stroke to 1 stroke difference. It might get closer to that half a stroke difference at the very most, but you're not going to see the kind of wave split between the first and second half where you have to take one side or the other. At least that's my take for round 2 Showdown. So I'm going to have players from the AM and the PM wave out there in lineups. I might stack a few lineups in the large field GPP where I'm only taking guys starting in the morning wave, just in case it's a bigger weather edge than we think, but that would only be a handful of lineups out of a portfolio of closer to 50 to 100. So it's not the biggest concern for my lineups tomorrow, and that might change if this forecast flips on its head. But as of the available forecast here at 8:10 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday afternoon, it doesn't look like there's a massive weather edge to be had. But on the PGA website, you can see some of the tee times. On my website, my Patreon page, I have the AM and PM guys on there, and the best part about SHIPIT Nation in the Stone too is they're going to delineate all of that. So if there is a potential weather edge you want to lean into, you're going to have a lot of resources to make that sort of thing happen. So you don't even just have to use the tee times over here. A lot of those DFS sources are going to do that legwork for you too. The next thing we're going to look at would be the shots gained metrics, which a few players are still finishing up their round. In fact, I'll go ahead and refresh this rather quickly here. But anyone you want me to deep dive with us together, feel free to go ahead and throw down in chat right now. So we're going to go through the shots gained metrics with ball striking. We're also going to go through some of the short game stuff for guys that are maybe due to come back down to earth. That's the normal spiel that we do for showdowns and rounds 2 through 4. But anyone on top of that you're curious about, that we didn't get to fully go through together, that kind of thing, just throw their name down in the chat. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up the table we want to bring up the shots gained ball striking stats. So that's not the tab to do it. Where can I add stats to the tab? There it is. Sorry, they made it smaller than what they had it there before. And we want to add shots gained ball striking just to make our lives a little bit easier. That's something that on Bet the Number that they include automatically. I'm a Bet the Number affiliate, so I'm always partial to their website for that reason. They haven't quite updated their shots gained metrics yet, so that's why we're using Data Golf right now. But the shots gained ball striking tab, now that we've accumulated that, you'll see that Nico Echeverria was the best player in the field today. He was an AM wave guy, if memory serves me correctly. Ryan Gerard gained nearly 4 strokes in that category. But these guys towards the top end here are always going to get a boost in my projections. But this also is something that other people know about. You're not going to be the only one looking at shots gained ball striking. Approach stats in particular are really what I want to focus on. And Nico Echeverria gained 6 strokes on approach today. That is not something that he's typically doing on tour. So I would say that it's highly unlikely that he's going to gain 6 strokes on approach again. But that is as big a green flag as you could find on a player. Whereas if somebody was gaining these 5 to 6 strokes in a short game category, so the short game categories, I'm talking about the putting and the around the green stats, which the reason why that's a red flag if they were gaining like 5-6 strokes in that category is that a lot of times those short game categories come down to luck. You've heard that from players all the time saying that they were hitting good putts, they were setting up opportunities, but they weren't having anything dropping. And you've heard the flip side from players. Shane Lowry is the king of doing this, where I'll hit like 10 to 12 greens in a round and shoot -6 because he's got 2 to 3 chip-ins on the round. So, around the green, if you're chipping in a whole lot, that's where you'll see that kind of spike performance. So to give you an idea of that, these guys that gained over 2 strokes around the green, first off, it means you either gave yourself a lot of opportunities around the green, which meant you were missing a lot of greens, which is usually not a good thing, or it meant that you chipped in a few times. So in either case, I'm not going to like a lot of these guys that popped with the around the green stats. Whereas if you lost a whole bunch of strokes around the green and you still had a decent round like a Seamus Power did, then these kind of guys could be due for some positive regression, because it's not very likely that these guys are going to lose 4 strokes out there every single round. So, whether it's positive or negative with these around the green stats, it's not like I think it's a good thing that they're losing all of these strokes. It's to say, though, that if they were solid elsewhere, like you have with the Seamus Power, he was into the positive with the 2 ball striking categories, then they might be worth a few looks for a bounce back. And these club professionals, you would kind of expect them to suck with the short game. But a Thurston Lawrence not going to lose 3 strokes around the green every single round. If he cleans that up, every other category was close to a neutral, if not well into the positive like you had for the putter. A Nico Echeverria could have actually had an even better day than what he had with a -3 rounds if he hadn't lost nearly 3 strokes around the green. A Thomas Dietrich, he gained strokes on approach. Could have been better off the tee, but not likely going to lose 2.5 strokes in that category. These are the kind of players that I'm looking for in Showdown tomorrow. And the added caveat on top of that we're really going to focus on when we talk about strategy, actually putting together a lineup or two together here in DraftKings, is the ownership angle. So when we're going through some of these players that lost a bunch around the green, not a lot of them are going to be chalk. Nico Echeverria, probably the one exception to that role. I would imagine that he's going to get some steam for your round 2 showdown contest. But a Lawrence, you're talking sub 1% ownership. No one's going to use him. A Seamus Power, he might be around 5 to 7%. People liked him at this course because of his course history. Maybe they're looking, he'll get played, but he's not going to be chalk at that portion of the board. You could find some really good low-owned plays here with the around the green stats. And the putting's the same way. These guys that gained well into the positive in this category are very unlikely to do it in back-to-back days. So while Seamus Power did lose a bunch around the green, he did gain a bunch with the putter. So maybe that offsets some of that there. So he's maybe not the best example of getting to one of those pivots, but a Cam Davis who gained 6 strokes with a putter, like he'd be the prime example of somebody that has to come back down to earth. He's not going to gain 24 strokes putting this week. If he does, it'll be by far the best putting performance that we've ever had all time. And 6 strokes into the positive is one of the better putting performances that I can remember ever out here on tour. It's partially because of all the club pros. They bring down the averages. They make it easier to gain strokes to the field, but 6 shots gained putting means he was pretty much making everything out there. So these kind of guys you would expect to come back down to earth a little bit. Now, Alex Smalley, a Luke Donald, who was potentially first-round leader for a while. That would have been wild if good old Ryder Cup captain Luke Donald ended up being that first-round leader, ended up getting passed by Johnny Vegas when it was all said and done. but not every player here is automatically a fade. If their ball striking stats were solid enough and they're not going to be chalky, I might still use them. So for example, with Thurston Lawrence here, he gained 3 strokes putting, but he also had that around the green regression that we mentioned before. Because he's unowned, he'll be sub 1%, and the shots gained ball striking was decent enough. There's a chance I would still use a Thurston Lawrence. But on the other side of that, players that are a lot chalkier, like a Cam Davis, there's next to no chance I'm going to use them in my player pool when they're going to be popular, maybe even double the ownership of some of the other guys around them. And he was so short game dependent. So you could say the same thing about some of the other guys here, like a Poston, Johnny Vegas. Like there's not a lot of chance that I'm going to play him. Not only did he gain nearly 3 strokes putting, but also over 2 strokes around the green. Steven Yeager, he's going to get steamed up in that top mid to top end of the 7K range. He's over 2 shots gained putting and over 2.5 there around the green. These sort of players, Benny Ann fits that same sort of description. And Ryan Fox might even get steamed up. He won last week at the Myrtle Beach Classic. These kind of guys that were gaining deep into the green in these 2 categories, raising a big red flag for me. Whereas on the other side of things, that ball striking we were mentioning before is the green flag that I'm looking for in players. And just to go through a few players that we didn't mention before from the ball striking angle, we have guys like JJ Spawn that hit the ball well today, a Daniel Berger, also even with only an even par round, gained in the 2 ball striking categories, but lost in the short game. Same thing with JJ Spawn, by the way. They both shot even par today, and it was very clear why. Their short game, they weren't getting anything to drop. If you were to interview these players after the fact, they would probably say that they hit the ball well. They felt like they could have gotten a lot more out of their games, is normally what you'll hear from these sort of players. And the next day, they oftentimes do. It doesn't mean they always have that short game regression. In fact, we've been waiting for Daniel Berger to have short game regression for a while now. If you've been playing DFS the last few golf tournaments, Daniel Berger is like allergic to making putts right now. So he's maybe a little bit less of a regression candidate. And I think that's fair to say because he's been so bad the last few events. But JJ Spawn has been making some putts. So, a Spawn, I would expect to turn it around sooner rather than later. And Daniel Berger is going to turn it around at some point as well. And when he does, because by the way, the ball striking stats during that stretch, the reason why I've been giving him a chance, and he's burned me a few times in Showdown, is because the ball striking's been there. He's always been hitting the ball well. That has been constant for the last few months. Imagine if he has a spike round, right? That's what I think of when I add him to my player pool, is imagine if he has that sort of a bounce back, because that's a slate breaking performance if he gains like 2 or 3 strokes putting. So those are the kind of guys that I'll take a shot on in my player pool. Terrell Hatton had a really good tee to green day, but lost with the putter, maybe a bounce back candidate. And Robert McIntyre also lost strokes putting despite being really good from tee to green. Who else fits that description? A Thorbjorn Olesen has that same kind of shots gained profile. A Daniel Van Tonder. Now he's a lower level DP World Tour guy. So he's maybe not my favorite play for round 2 Showdown, but from the stat profile perspective, this is exactly what we're looking for. So if you want to take a shot in the dark, I don't think he's the worst play that you could take towards the very bottom end of the pricing. But the issue with round 2 Showdown, round 3 Showdown now is that the pricing only goes down to $6,000. So they completely change it up on us. The pricing dynamic is a lot different than what you have for your main slate, where a lot of these guys like Van Tonder are like $5,200. You were spending nothing on them. It was giving you a lot of leverage to spend up top. Now, the other part of it is that Scheffler's a little bit cheaper now. Same thing with Rory. I think he's like $400, $500 cheaper than what he was for that main slate. But you're also not able to take these 5K guys where it's like a $2,000 discount, even off of some of those 7K players. You're not going to get that with a Van Tonder anymore. So that's why he's maybe not my favorite play for round 2 Showdown. I think if you were going to use some of these super cheap guys, it was for main slate. I did it in a lot of cases, like Tom McKibben, we mentioned on the live stream. I think he finished at like even or -1, pretty solid start to the week. Like I took shots on guys down low because they were super cheap. I'm not so much going to do it for the rest of the week now. So it's going to mostly be like mid to top end of the 6K range guys that I'm using for my pivots down low, right? It's not to say that I won't have 6K players. It's just not going to be like the pure punt plays like you have right there. A few other guys I want to point out would be Harris English. He was good for this tee to green play, almost about 2.5 strokes ball striking, but lost 2.5 strokes putting. You also have a Kurt Kitayama, Shane Lowry that were really good with their ball striking stats. Kurt Kitayama, 3 shots gained approach, and Shane Lowry, nearly 2 shots gained with his approach stats there. All of these sort of guys that could have gained more with the flat stick are players that I'll at least consider in my process. It doesn't mean they're all automatic plays. There are going to be players that we talk about here together that I don't end up using. That would be ownership based though. If you can give me average to below average ownership on any of those players, at least for my 150 max exposure, I will get over the field on those sort of players. It's pretty much black and white like that for me. It's real simple in my process. I try not to overcomplicate things all that much. If they're chalky, I could still play them. It doesn't mean they're an automatic fade if they're chalk, by the way, either. You can still use chalk sparingly in your player pool, but for rounds 2 and 3 showdown, replacement points aren't in play. It's a 1 round sample size, just 18 holes as opposed to 72. I really try and embrace that variance and that chaos where I can. So, there might be a few pieces of chalk that leak their way in, but there's not going to be a whole bunch of it. A few other players that stand out, Rasmus Neergaard Peterson. I always say his name wrong, so I have to do that one slowly. He gained in both the ball striking categories, but lost in the 2 short games. You also had Corey Connors do the exact same thing. So just 2 more examples of guys I'm going to be looking at the ownership on. And sites like SHIPIT Nation are going to have their ownership projections posted when they post the stone. My projections, my Patreon page are also going to have my projection sheet, which is the nuts when it comes to these kind of slates. And having reliable ownership projections that you can count on. I spend a lot of time, a lot of hard sweat and tears out there into my process and putting in my ownership projections, because that's really all that matters for round 2 showdown. Having good projections matters too, point projections, so that you can build good lineups with your optimizers. That's part of the process, but the even bigger part of it is playing that game theory edge, knowing where everyone else is more likely to go so that you can leverage that, because not everyone out there has access to those kind of projections. Heck, some of you watching this, right, might not have access to projections that are all that reliable. You may see lock and you may look at your ownership of your lineups like after lock happens, and you may go like, what the hell is this? Because some of the websites, they post ownership projections out there, but they're not all that accurate. You'll see some websites that have guys at like 25%, and then they come in like 7.5% owned, and you're like, what the hell? I faded that guy because I thought he was chalk, and now he's only 7% owned. He was checking all the boxes for me. I would have used him in my lineups, and he goes off and he's the absolute nuts, right? That's the worst. That was the case for me before I started my own website, before I started doing my own projections, because no one gave a rat's ass about Showdown. That's why I really like the SHIPIT Nation crew over here, because they go sweaty, try hard into the Showdown streets just like I do. But that's why I really am so passionate about doing these live streams, doing this content for you guys and whatnot, is because there's a big edge to be had if you have the right data. So if you're somebody that doesn't have those sort of projections yet, or maybe you're a part of a site that doesn't have projections that you feel very confident in, make sure to check out SHIPIT Nation. Make sure to check out my Patreon page as well, what I'm doing with my projections, and you won't be disappointed going forward. If you have people that care, that are plugged in with the process, that have proven results when it comes to their ownership algorithm, then tail those sort of things. And you're going to get that with my page, and of course with the SHIPIT Nation channel, which is exactly why we have this partnership. I wouldn't pair up with a page that I didn't feel as confident in as what I have with my own stuff. We've also got Gary Woodland as another play that I want to point out here. And I can tell you at this +3 number that in my projections, which sometimes they vary from SHIPIT, but SHIPIT does a good job with theirs too. We don't usually differ all that much. I don't always compare them, but I have at times, and they do a really good job over there too. Gary Woodland's not going to be chalk though, right? Regardless of which site you're going to look at, I can guarantee you the SHIPIT guys aren't going to make him chalk either, because he wasn't that popular this week, and now he's +3. But from the shots gained perspective, he's gained about a stroke in the ball striking categories, but lost over 2 strokes in the short game. So these are the kind of pivots that I'm looking for, especially if they're even par to over par, because no one's going to use that sort of a guy. And it's like even a Will Zalatoris at T61. I know it's not a sexy stat profile, but he gained in every category from tee to green but approach, and approach was just ever so slightly negative, and he couldn't make any putts. So it's not going to do you anything with the scoring. In fact, look at this, par central on the scorecard. But imagine if he gets a few of those putts to drop for birdie rather than having to 2-putt all day out there for par. So this is the sort of player that I'll be trying to get over the field on, especially if we can get him at that sub 5% ownership mark. And there's a chance that Will Zalatoris, I haven't ran my projections yet, might be close to that 5% ownership mark, which for a player that's getting up there in the pricing is going to be a rare find in that portion of the board. There were a few guys for main slate in the 8K range that were sub 7% owned, mostly because of the quote unquote dead spot that we had in that portion of the pricing. Will Zalatoris, I'm hoping, can have a similar ownership number to that because he'd be a really good way to get different towards the middle end of the board. Let's see if anyone else really stands out. We're starting to get towards the sketchier ball strikers, so that's probably as low as we want to go on that kind of a list. But that's the idea out there with using these shots gained metrics, is they're not the end all be all. You still have to use ownership to your advantage. But when you're trying to find the low-owned guys to play, this is a really good idea to start your process. And you don't have to have the same process that I do for finding your player pool. You can incorporate your own stats on top of it. You can add, subtract things to your own liking. You can do the complete opposite if you'd like as well, right? Like, have your own process for round 2 showdown. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do because I don't win every single slate. I win a lot more than most people do in the showdown streets, but you can have your own process, always improve on it, and find what works for you with the contest that you're entering. For example, on the SHIPIT Nation Stone, they've got round 2 historical, which is a data point that you could use for tomorrow. That I'm not a huge believer in like the round by round stuff, so that's not something that I incorporate personally, but a lot of people that I've talked to use that sort of stuff religiously. They swear by it, using the stuff, especially for like round 4 historical, and using that to find some of their lower owned plays. If you're going to use that, you can add that on top of what I talk about here with these shots gained metrics. And just to give you an idea, I have 4 things that I look for in players in my showdown player pool, and that's for rounds 2 and 3. The last round, I add one on top of it, but I'll mention it after. First thing is ball striking. So we mentioned that off the bat. I want guys that hit the ball well off the tee and on approach because that's the most consistent part of golf from round to round. Number 2 is the short game guys. That would be the around the green and the putting guys that are due to come back around a little bit. Now, I don't do that blindly. It's not a good thing that they lost strokes around the green and putting. But if they did decent hitting the ball, then I'll get to them for a bounce back there. I also take course history players, which last week we didn't have because it was a new golf course, but we do have course history around Quail Hollow. And then I also take high upside players. So players that have a high birdie percentage, are aggressive players that are high par 5 score on the par 5 scoring list that are going to go out there and outscore their place position when it comes to making birdies, which for the showdown perspective, in terms of raw DraftKings scoring, are going to be some of your higher projected plays. Players like a Jesper Svensson, a Nicholas Norgard Bowler, who's one of the longest players on tour, also one of the highest birdie percentage players that we've had here in 2025. He might be towards the bottom end of pricing. His main slate projection might have just been average to maybe above average, but his showdown projection and what you'll see on like my site is that this is accounted for, is his projection is going to be a lot better because he's such a high birdie percentage player. Because he is so aggressive, I'm bump up his projection with that birdie percentage because he always outscores his raw score. And what I mean by that, it might shoot like even par on the day, but it's usually like an even par because he made 5 birdies and made 5 bogeys, which if you don't know how the DraftKings scoring works, if you have 5 birdies and 5 bogeys, as opposed to just making 18 pars on the day, the guy with 5 birdies and 5 bogeys, I don't know the exact number, but he's going to probably like double up on the scoring of the guy that made all the pars. The bogey-free round would be nice to have with all the 18 pars, but it doesn't make up for having those 5 birdies on the scorecard. So keep that in mind as well with your process. We're going to catch up on chat, so any of those player deep dives, feel free to go ahead and throw them down in the chat right now. But afterwards, we're going to go through some of the strategy for the next day. He said chalk landmines all over. Yep, definitely a lot of chalk that's in a bad position so far. What's going on, Jay? What's going on, Joseph, as well? Love to see you down in there in the chat. He said a lot of bounce back rounds tomorrow. And yeah, that's another thing I want to mention too. The bounce back metric that the SHIPIT Nation Stone has, that could be a good one for the next day. And I know they used to have that. I don't know if they still have it on the Stone. That might be something that they ended up scrapping, or I think they changed it ever so slightly like a month ago. But bounce back metrics and bounce back rounds in general, there's going to be a ton of them tomorrow. So good call on that, man. And especially for your like 8, 9, and 10K players, a lot of them shot even to over par today. So don't be afraid to get a little dirty, to dive down in the trash a little bit, do some dumpster diving, and find some of those bounce back performances. I will say, guys, if you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything to come. He said, Patty Reed, top 10. Not sure where he is right now, but I surely hope that he top 10s at this event. Where do you leave off? He's T60 right now. Hopefully he can get into that top 10. I would surely like that. What do I think the cut line will be? I think it'll be +1, +3. He said, nip of the bourbon tonight, Lukey. I wish I had some bourbon right now, but, we're going to wait till Saturday, Sunday. We'll take it easy here until we get to the weekend. He said, Sungjae Wyndham. So let's look at a few of those players. So Sungjae, first off, he did not have the kind of day that a lot of people would have hoped for, but at +2, you're going to get slightly lower ownership. He lost on approach. He also lost with the putter today, and he gained in the other two categories. So this shots gained profile is a 5 out of 10. He gained in one of the ball striking categories. He lost in the other. He gained in one of the two short game categories. He lost in the other. So a lot of that neutralizes each other when it comes to how we evaluate this kind of profile. The one thing I'll say about the scorecard is that it lacked birdies. He only had 2 on the day, and the par 5s he butchered. He bogeyed the first one, parred the second, and then also parred 15, and the drivable 14th he didn't take advantage of. So that feels highly, highly unlikely to happen again. He's a very good around the green player. He's a straight driver of the golf ball, which is key for scoring on those sort of holes. So yeah, essentially a decent bounce back candidate, I would say, especially because like the easy holes weren't easy for him today. Wyndham was the exact opposite. Wyndham shot over par despite making a bunch of birdies. So this isn't the same kind of like profile as you had with the Sungjae, but I wouldn't say that Wyndham Clark is out of play either. He didn't have a particularly good putting day today. You could see about a neutral when it comes to the shots gained putting, and he's one of the best putters that we have on the PGA Tour. So I would expect him to putt a little bit better tomorrow. So he still might make a bunch of bogeys. That's kind of Wyndham Clark's MO lately. He's spraying the ball with the driver, but because his putting is so good and his wedges are also pretty dialed in, you're going to see him making a lot of birdies when he hits the fairway. So I would say he's like a GPP flyer. He's the kind of guy that I'll be using in lineups because at T60, he's not going to be popular, probably about average, maybe even below average ownership for that portion of the pricing, which for the kind of guy, he's similar to a Nicholas Norgard-Muller, where Wyndham Clark, even if he's not playing his best golf, will still make a bunch of birdies. And he saw that exact thing today. He shot over par, but still had 4 birdies. His DraftKings score compared to Sungjae is way better. It's probably like 6 or 7 points higher than Sungjae, which I know doesn't sound like a massive difference, but that's a massive difference when it comes to your GPP performance. That could be the difference between min cashing and finishing in like the top 10, 15% of a contest. And then who was the other one there? So, oh yeah, it was just those two. Cool. Xander has to pop at some point, right? He's got to hit some fairways first, Alan, before that happens. But I think that his round today, at least based on what he said, may have came down. Sorry, I just typed Alan. What am I doing there? That's my B. His round came down to the mud balls, at least based on what he was saying to the media today. But I don't know if that's really true. He still gained on approach. He had that one really bad shot on 16 where I can see where the mud ball might have really affected him there. But the rest of the round, and I got to see a lot of it for Xander Schauffele, there were no crazy ball flights where it looked like the mud was significantly impacting play. Now, I wasn't down there on the course. I wasn't looking at every lie. So I don't know for sure. No one's ever going to know for sure when it comes to Xander Schauffele. But could he pop at some point this week? For sure. He's a top 3 player in the world. I wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if Rory popped off tomorrow. This is his golf course, the one that he's won at 3-4 times. I don't know if it's 3 or 4. I know it's a shit ton of times for Rory McIlroy. Scotty Scheffler, it is his first time ever at Quail Hollow, but it's world number 1. And the guy who won it like -30 a few weeks ago. So yeah, whoever it is up top, it could be a Xander Schauffele that struggled. Cantlay, right? He shot like +4 or something like that. I'm glad I didn't play him for main slate, but for round 2 showdown, I could easily see myself playing that kind of guy because a lot of guys struggled. It wasn't just those kind of guys that sucked. It was most of the guys towards the top end of the board. So I'm okay with it. Kitayama, let's look at his stat profile. So good old Kurt the Hurt. He gained a bunch on approach today, was kind of sketchy off the tee, but could have been a lot better with the putter. And this wasn't a lot of birdie putts that he was missing. On his front 9, these 3 bogeys were all 3 putts. So that was something to see. He was really just hitting a lot of greens on his front 9. I'm not doing a lot of scoring, so sure, he could have made more birdie putts on his front side. But this is the kind of stat profile that I think could pop off because all he has to do is clean up those 3 putts. And today he's under par. And that's going to keep the ownership lower because he had a lot of those 3 putts. So yeah, decent. I wish he was better off the tee, but he's a bomber. He's just got to hit more fairways, it looks like. Luke, can we deep dive Kaba and Decky? We for sure can. You said you think that they would perform well, sans a couple blow up holes. Yeah, let's look at it. So Hideki Matsuyama, first off, gained in every category but the 2 ball striking ones. So this is kind of the opposite of what we want to see, but they're all so close to neutral that I don't think we can read too much into this kind of stat profile. He's within like a half a stroke in every shots gained category, just a little bit over half a stroke with the shots gained putting. So could he turn it around? I think for sure. This is like the most average profile I've ever seen. And it's not like he really had blow up holes today. It was just kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. He had 4 bogeys on the round, only 3 birdies. Let's look at the par 5s and stuff. So the first one he didn't take care of 14, didn't take care of 15. Just like Sungjae Im, I like this kind of a bounce back because these easy holes, and by the way, the easy ones, it's not just 7, 14, and 15. It's also hole 8 here. So he did take advantage of hole number 8. But if you have somebody that only birdied one of those 4 holes, but the rest of their golf was like semi-decent, like I know it's not a great stat profile, but he was semi-decent outside of those few holes, then yeah, I'll use him for a bounce back for sure. And who was the other one? You wanted to look at Morikawa, huh? Morikawa. He really was playing well for most of his round. He didn't play terrible when it was all said and done, but he was a little short game dependent, which this around the green, this 2.6 strokes around the green was the sickest and nastiest 2.6 strokes around the green I may have ever seen. He didn't chip in or anything. So actually, I take that back. He did on 17. He did chip in. So that was 1.3 of the strokes right there. The rest of it was him using like 9-wood around the green. He was using a 3-wood. I think it was the 9-wood though, because it looked like it had a little bit more loft than your typical 3-wood does. And instead of putting around the green, instead of hitting those chips off that grainy Bermuda grass, he was using that club, which I thought was very creative. They were showing him a lot on the broadcast doing that. And every time he took it out, and he got up and down when he was using that club. So shout out to Colin Morikawa. Probably not going to rely on that every single round, but it was something to behold today. So yeah, Morikawa's a below average course shots gained fit, I would say. A slightly above average one over there for Hideki. Keegan Bradley. Let's look at Keegan, good old American Ryder Cup captain, which Luke Donald had the slightly more impressive round, but -3 for Keegan was still very respectable himself. He gained over 3 strokes ball striking, so 1.5 off the tee, 1.8 strokes for the approach stats. He gained with the short game, but it wasn't what carried him today. This is a shots gained profile of somebody that I could get behind in like a single entry. He played well. He's got the solid form going and whatnot. The issue is going to be the ownership. So depending on what kind of entry, what kind of contest that you're entering, large field GPPs, you might have to worry about the ownership angle. But in cash, single entry, smaller field GPPs, I'm not 100% sure I'm playing Keegan Bradley quite yet, but this stat profile is among the best that we've seen so far. So it's going to be in high consideration. And I would say more often than not, I'm most likely going to have him in my pool. Hey, Luke, any hope for a bounce back from Brooks and Burmester? As bad as they played, they missed some easy putts. Yeah, I mean, if they miss some easy putts, then I think you know the answer to this question, right? If they make the putts tomorrow, then they can get the job done. So, yeah, Burmester lost in the 2 short game categories. +3, by the way, was only about a stroke over the average, so really wasn't even that terrible of a round. And then I think Brooks shot +4, so yeah, he ended up at that +4 number. He's got to clean up the ball striking, though. And I can tell you from seeing Brooks Koepka today that it wasn't the putting for Brooks Koepka. He had much bigger issues. He had 1 free putt, which was a little bit terrible. 1 miss from, I think, 6 feet for a par, but that happens to these guys out there in tour. The issue was him missing like every fairway, him missing every green. He looked like absolute shit. So I would say that if somebody's going to bounce back between those two, that it would more than likely be a Dean Burmester. And that's not to say that Brooks can't do it, though. So I know I just buried my guy, and half the reason I'm doing it is I hope he proves me wrong. Brooks Koepka is one of my favorite players on tour. It really pains me every time I see him miss the cut at a big-time event. He has plenty of wins, though, so don't have to feel too bad for Brooks, I guess. But he's the kind of guy that could flip the switch. There's always that or he could factor. But Brooks, I don't know if he's the best or he could factor guy, because normally you want guys that are grinders that actually give a shit, that aren't going to bitch quit. Brooks Koepka, a lot of people, at least on X/Twitter, from what I've seen in the PGA DFS space, love to shit on him for not trying because he went to live. So if you want to play the narrative game and play like the leverage game for tomorrow, maybe you do play Brooks Koepka because everyone's going to bury him. He plays better when he has that chip on his shoulder. In fact, I may throw him into a few GPP lineups, but I wouldn't be using him in like a single entry, that sort of thing. It's a tough scene with what I saw with how he was actually hitting the golf ball. The only reason to use Brooks Koepka, at least that I think would be a good reason to use him for a large field GPP, would be to get mega different towards the top end of the board because his price tag, I think he's like, what, 90 something $100. Let's see. So he's $8,300. So they did give him quite a decrease in the price from main slate to round 2 showdown. But in this portion of the board, you're talking about Brooks being half the ownership of most guys around him. Like a Corey Connors, I could see being double the ownership, and that's not even with Corey Connors playing all that well. I think a Straka is going to be a lot more popular than a Brooks Koepka. And compared to everyone else around him in this range, I can see Jason Day being slightly lower owned than Brooks Koepka. But outside of that, everyone else is going to be higher owned. He's going to be your second lowest owned player in this 8K range, at least based on my early read on this kind of a slate. And if that's the case, like that would be the incentive to playing a Brooks Koepka. But I don't know, man. The shots gained profile is not looking too hot. I wouldn't count on it. Smalley thoughts? Thank you, Luke, of course. By the way, Mr. Smalley, Mr. Last Man In, almost got that first round leader. I forgot who was talking about the potential first round leader bet, but that was a good sweat if you threw that one in. He gained 4 strokes putting today, though, so that doesn't seem all that reliable. He did gain 1.5 strokes off the tee, so not my favorite stat profile, I would say. This is the kind of player that I would expect to come back down to earth with the short game. He could gain 1.5 strokes off the tee again, even improve with the approach play. But to get to a spike performance, he's still going to have to gain like 2.5 stroke short game, which doesn't feel like something that's very consistent for Smalley. And if you know his stat profile, if you've been following him on the PGA Tour, he's not the most consistent putter. He's a spike putter. He has good rounds like what you saw for round number 1, but he doesn't do it all that consistently. Stacking Rory and Lowry, what are my thoughts on that? So I like Rory in general for round 2 showdown. Main reason for that isn't really shots gained based. It's game theory based. He's going to be one of the lowest owned studs that you have towards the top. Also did not make a lot of putts today. And he makes a lot of putts around Quail Hollow historically. So I would expect that to turn around sooner rather than later. And then with Lowry, I kind of like the low ownership on Lowry. So, you're getting lower ownership on Rory up top to start, and then you're mixing that in with a second man in that's also going to be a little bit lower owned than you'd expect. I like it a lot. And look at this, right? He lost 2.8 strokes with the putter today. Yeah, I like that kind of start a lot because it's giving you leverage. It's fitting that short game regression that we mentioned before. Rory's ball striking wasn't that great today. So he's kind of like the Brooks Koepka thing where I have more faith in Rory because he's not a bitch quitter. Also because Rory is somebody that's played really well at this golf course before. Shane Lowry, on the other hand, was not that far off. He lost almost all of his strokes with the putter. He was electric with the irons, gaining nearly 2 strokes in that category. I love that kind of idea, man. In fact, I'm probably going to play both of those two, just seeing the shots gained profiles there. And starting with those two, I'm sure I'll have lineups that start with those two if I play them. What do I think about the single entry chalk? So the way I do that, Jay, is that normally the highest owned players end up becoming a little bit higher owned in single entry. So the chalk for the regular slate for round 2 showdown and like GPPs is going to be the chalk in single entries. It's just that chalk is going to be a little bit more extreme. So for example, if somebody's like 25% projected owned up top, they might be closer to 35% in single entries. That's what you should know about that sort of ownership. So ownership projections, I know you're a part of my Patreon page already, Jay. Those will be posted after we get off live stream here and I can get everything finalized. But when you see those higher owned players on the spreadsheet later, Jay, just know that like the guys that are super dark red, like the highest owned in each range, add sometimes 5 to 10% to those players. And that's going to be what they are in single entries. If Akshay keeps his putter hot and his approach stats, he could have a great week. Yeah, I thought he was a sneaky good course fit. So I tend to agree with you in general there. And Akshay Bhatia, yeah, that kind of stat profile, putter and approach play, those are the 2 most important categories I would say on tour. The putters kind of variance from round to round. So we'll see if he can keep that hot. but a hot iron play Akshay Bhatia is a dangerous Akshay Bhatia because there's been a bunch of times on tour this year already where he's gone like 2.5 strokes into the positive in all 4 rounds, and either been the best or like the second best iron player in signature level fields. And oftentimes the only player that he was losing to in the category was Scotty Scheffler. So it's no shame, by the way, to lose to Scotty in that category. So JT is the most no yes player ever. He is, huh? He likes yelling at his golf ball. The only one that's more than that is Jordan Spieth. Jordan Spieth yells at his golf ball too. He said, also, hey, Luke, thank you for your work. Your low-end plays are looking good so far. Yeah, keyword so far, but I appreciate the shout out on that. He said, like a bounce back from Dietrich. Yeah, let's look at it. So it comes down to the shots gained profile. He will be low owned. So if that's your cup of tea in GPPs, you could look at him in a few lineups. I need a sip of water. Mouth is getting a little dry, as you might tell there. His around the green stats are minus 2.6 strokes. That is going to come back down to earth, you'd expect. He did gain with the putter, but it wasn't overly into the positive, so he wasn't carrying himself there. And he gained on approach. So do I like him for a bounce back? I mean, I'd say he's got the same kind of chance as pretty much anyone else in that range would. This shots gained profile doesn't really stand out from that perspective, but because he's low owned, he's always going to be somebody I at least consider in my process. And the other thing about Thomas Dietrich that I liked this week is that he hits the ball a long way. He played about the PGA Championship last year. He's played about other major championships worldwide. He had an Open Championship where he had a top 20. He's played decently at a US Open before as well. Yeah, give me some Thomas Dietrich. So mostly with the low ownership, but shots gained profile, kind of just meh, like a 5 out of 10 from that perspective. Keith Mitchell is still going to be the biggest donkey dick play for round 2. Yeah, he probably won't be that chalky for tomorrow just because of how he played today. But let's see. So he's +1. The other thing I need to check is the price tag. So if he's like more expensive, then no, he's probably going to be a lot lower owned. So yeah, because he's $7,600, I don't think he's going to be as higher owned. And in fact, because now people are going to jump ship on a Keith Mitchell, it's like the perfect time to buy in, right? Especially if you faded him for main slate. I would say if you faded Keith Mitchell this week for main slate, you should almost for sure be playing him in Showdown tomorrow, because if he nukes tomorrow and you played him in Showdown, then great, you have the nuke performance. But if he doesn't and he maybe misses the cut, that kind of thing, then you win from that perspective too. So I played him this week, so I'm not in that boat. I'm only mentioning that if I had potentially faded him as that donkey chalk. But yeah, it's like a typical move for that chalk to do, by the way. Like kind of suck round 1, kind of be towards the average, and then round 2, just go batshit crazy. We've seen it 1,000 times. And if he doesn't go batshit tomorrow, I'll probably do it round 3. So Chris says, do we see an edge in the longer players like I anticipated? It's only been 1 round, but I would say yes. Johnny Vegas, a longer player. Cam Davis, a longer player. Of these top-level finishers, only Luke Donald and then Aaron Rai would be short players off the tee. So it is way too early to know. There's been other majors where after 1 round, it looked like one skill set was going to be the case. We have no idea is the answer to your question. So we'll have to circle back to that after Sunday. But, I mean, as of right now, I would say that there's no evidence to say that that idea should be dismissed, because you have guys like Thor Bjornsson towards the top, hand hits the ball a long way. We mentioned Nico Echeverria being that like long bomber course fit with the long irons. Bradley, Robert McIntyre, Campos hits the ball a long way. I mean, Noren's one of the shorter guys up there too, but a lot of guys that hit the ball a long way too. So we'll see. I don't know. Jury's still out on that one. I would say closer to Saturday, Sunday, we'll have an idea. You said, sorry if I already touched on that. Yeah, didn't touch on it because it's kind of a moot point right now. Love the low-owned chalk blow up. Looking at you, Hughes. Yeah, me too. Yeah, we faded them, right? We mentioned that on yesterday's live stream. There's a lot of chalk, by the way, that's fading so far, and it's probably going to miss the cut. So one more day of that, by the way, and I'm crossing my fingers and I'm knocking on wood, because I really hope a lot of those high-owned guys end up packing it and getting on the jet. Joseph says, thanks, pal. Good luck all, of course. Any hope for Minwoo Lee? Yeah, for sure. He didn't have that terrible of a day, right? I think he was like +4, right? +3. Yeah, for sure. So the one thing I'll say, and I guess because we're getting a lot of questions about these like guys at +3, like, do they have hope? Guys, it's a major championship. If you're new to PGA DFS, maybe you started playing over like the last half a year or something like that, and you're not used to golf courses that are hard like this, +3, just to remind everyone so that we can be on the same page here, it's 1 stroke, a little bit worse than a stroke worse than your average. A lot of times on tour, scoring average is like -2.5. That's like being -1 or -2 after round one. And I'm sure a lot of people that, look at their DraftKings scores and whatnot after round one, even if they're like not even doing that well in their contest and they see a -1 and -2, they're like, oh, my guy did pretty good. You could be in the same kind of boat as what you have with that +3 and just not know it. So yeah, does he have hope? For sure. I mean, he's like one stroke off the cut line. It could be a +2, even a +3 cut line, I would say. Data Golf, let's see where they have the cut line. I haven't checked that one yet. So yeah, they have it most likely at +2. I think it could go to +3 though, just because it's a major. It played +1.7. Most times we multiply that by 2 and you get your cut line. That's not like a steadfast rule, but it works for most cases. Yeah, I'd say +2, +3. So, I mean, he shoots even par -1 tomorrow. He can make the cut. Because he wasn't making a lot of putts today, he lost 1.5 strokes there. He has just even a neutral day in that category. That could be enough to get him over the hump. He gains 1-2 strokes. That could be a really good day for Showdown. So not only do I think he has hope to make the cut, and just for your lineups in general, I think he's a pretty decent Showdown play, because just like some of the other guys that spun their wheels for today's action, they're not going to be high owned tomorrow, which is a big thing in terms of game theory. SHIPIT Nation, bro, that's funny. You said Norton was good and that Cam Davis was a wild card. There you go. Hey, you should have played them then, Blake. You're probably having a good week then. Shocking. Bryson led in driving distance. Yeah, shocking. But I'd say there's a few guys that can get it out there with him in this field. Some of the younger guys, but he'll probably lead all 4 days. Yeager and Poston both did great. You went ahead and played McCarty. Not a great day. Yeah, dude, you got to stick to your guns then, Blake, right? If you have all those plays, then use them. That's usually what I tell people, is to stick with your guns. I'm a big proponent of that, because if you're getting on plays for a reason, then you should be using them. That's what I normally say. So thanks a lot. You're the man, of course. Let's see. Are we playing the donkey chalk? No, most likely not, Jay. So my take in round 2 Showdown, round 3 Showdowns the same way, is you embrace the variance. You try and fade a lot of the chalk, the guys that are higher owned, because it's an 18-hole sample size. When we have 72 holes, guys like Scotty Scheffler are going to find their way towards the top end of the board. That's why the sports books, by the way, if you look at the sportsbook odds right now, have them as the favorite still, because they know after 72 holes that the cream is going to rise to the top. So am I playing the donkey chalk? Probably not, because I like all those guys that struggled today that are the best players in the world, that you're going to see a ton of guys that go low tomorrow that suck today. So no, I'm going to be on the lower owned guys instead. Part of the live guy narrative is that they aren't playing every week and aren't playing around the globe on odd golf courses. Not sure what that means, but he said probably tough to play on the PGA Tour course with a more elite field. That's the thing, Paul. They're not playing on like odd golf courses. Like, that's what I don't understand about that, is they're playing on like better courses than the PGA Tour. Like, I think that you might just be getting your information from a spot that's not correct. They play Valderrama. They play the DP World Tour course, Jack Nicklaus Country Club. That is the nicest club that you have in South Korea. Respectfully, I disagree with that. And like the course they played in Mexico a few weeks ago, was the home of the WGC Bridgestone that they had down there in Mexico on the PGA Tour. One of the biggest events of WGC that they held. So I don't agree with that. They're playing tour level courses every single week over there. Guys like Tom Kippen proved that. John Rahm had a better day than all the other studs today. I think that narrative is crap, right? And if people are going to be changing lineups and holding it against these guys because of that, then so be it. I'll take all the leverage, because, I mean, I'm not saying I'm a massive fan of the league. I mean, they're a lower level product than the PGA Tour for sure. I'd rather watch PGA every single day of the week over Live Golf, but they still have a lot of talented guys over there. And if you're just crossing them off because you think they're playing odd golf courses, then I think you're making a massive mistake. You can still do that, right? Everyone's entitled to their own process and opinion, but I think it's a mistake. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. You had Brooks win. He was on Live Tour. You had Bryson win last year on Live Tour. That kind of speaks for itself, right? In the single entry big dog, am I playing the donkey chalk? Probably still not playing it, by the way, if that's what you meant with your question. It's a slate to get different, man. A slate to embrace the variance. What do I think about Xander, potential Showdown play? Yes, he's a potential bounce back Showdown play up top. There's a lot of guys that you're going to have to choose between, though. And he said he's off first. Yeah, let's look at the tee times. If he is off first, I don't think he is, right? Xander's not off first, because Xander went off in the morning today, unless they really screwed with the tee times. Looks like Keith Mitchell's going off first, though. So that's probably who Ross was talking about. Yeah, Keith Mitchell going off first is donkey chalk, finding that bounce back. I'm assuming you were at that point in the live stream when he was mentioning that. Yeah, that's book it now, man. He's going to go low. That seems like the biggest no-brainer in human history. Xander could crush tomorrow big time. I think so too. I mean, it's just a top 3 player in the world. Give me that every single day. You like the way I think, Luke. I like the way you think too, Ross. Woodland seems like a fun click tomorrow. Yeah, I'm playing him. I mean, I used him for main slate, so I might as well just dig my grave at this point, right? If I used him for main slate, I got to use him when he's low owned for round 2 showdown, and especially when it was the short game that held him back. So I'll be there right with you. I mean, it just looks like a good stat profile to play. And if you, by the way, if you liked guys for round 1 or for main slate, I should say, and they sucked round 1, play them in round 2 showdown. I'm not saying to do it with every player that sucked in your player pool, but in a lot of cases, they're going to go off tomorrow, like especially if they're stud in that 9-10K range. Of course, Chris, what chalk looks like it's going to miss the cut a lot, man. I mean, Mackenzie Hughes looks like it's going to miss the cut. And I'm actually going to bring up the ownership right now just so that I can look at the top end of it and point out some potential names. I have it in my Discord, so I'm bringing it up on another tab. Let's see. So currently, guys like Justin Thomas are near or potentially outside the cut line. Keith Mitchell is near or potentially outside of the cut line. Rory McIlroy is. So a lot of guys are. In fact, of the top end of ownership, most guys are outside or on the cut line. Like a Sepp Straka is in contention of missing the cut. A Patrick Reed could be on the chopping block, right? If he has a below average day, he could end up missing the weekend. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous how many guys could potentially end up missing that are over 7% owned. So a whole lot of them, and it makes for a whole lot of fun. I think we're going to see some bounce backs, which will be good for showdown. Xander's going to be going low tomorrow, and honestly, McCarty could go low too. Yeah, you're exactly right about that, dude. Just because they had a bad day today does not mean it's going to happen again tomorrow. You were referring to Mitchell, Luke, you're bad. Yep, I got you. Yeah, I know. I saw that, by the way. We're on the same page, Ross. Like you said, you like the way I think. I'm starting to get you a little bit more as time goes on. You're always referring to stuff as it happens live, and then I'm always catching your comments after the fact. But we're getting more synergized as time goes on. Is our boy Brooksy, or you said our boy Brooksy had a tough day today, Luke? Hope he can shake it back. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that had a tough day. You could say that about Rory McIlroy. The guys that are up there at +3, +4, it's a tough golf course. So maybe you just missed the little spiel I had about the course averages. It's a +2 scoring average. So I think a lot of you guys are looking at those scores and taking it the wrong way. Add another golf course that's playing to a -2.5 scoring average. It's like shooting even par, right? And there's no way that a lot of you would feel the same way about that player if you saw even par over there on DraftKings. So just try and give these guys a little bit more leniency. And I can just tell right now, I haven't built my ownership projections. When I build these ownership projections, the guys that all suck today that like shot +2 or worse, I'm putting it like no ownership, because based on the questions I'm getting down there in chat, I can tell that the general sentiment is that anyone over par people think just sucked, which is not true. If you shot +2, it was like an average day today. And I think that the guys that are +2 are going to be like royally underowned. So speaking of, let's actually go to the leaderboard and just like look at the +2s, because they shot an average round and everyone seems to want to shit on these guys. So let's see. Shane Lowry is probably going to be way, way lower owned than he should be. Except Straka, right? It's not even like he had a terrible day. He's T74. He'll probably be a lot lower owned than he should be. Kurt Kitayama had the really good approach stats. The +3s, you could say that about even more. Like I saw somebody calling Eugenio Chacarra a slapdick, by the way. Chacarra is T74, is on the cut line. Okay, like whatever. I'm sure, yeah, he's a slapdick for being on the cut line in the toughest field in all of golf, right? This is the idea though, right? Based on, and I'm not picking on anyone. I get it. I used to be that way when I was new to golf too. But you got to have different perspective, right? When you have this kind of slate. And I actually think there could be a psychological advantage tomorrow to playing these guys at +2, +3, just because people don't realize how good they actually played. And I hate to say like how good they played because they're average in this kind of field, but it's average in the best field of golf. Like that's really not that terrible of a performance. So a Sun GM, for example, shot +2. No one's going to give him any credit whatsoever. Like maybe you throw him into lineups. A Thomas Dietrich, like we had questions about him having a quote unquote bounce back. He's like one stroke off of the average. So like, give me all the leverage on these guys. Like Rory is +3. Joaquin Niemann at +3. By the way, Joaquin Niemann should have made so many more birdies today. I had an over 3.5 birdie line on him too. That was just heartbreaking to have Hook there at 0.5, but he's due to make a whole lot more. Dean Burmester, same thing. Just clean up the bogeys on those last few holes. I think I found my edge for tomorrow because these guys are playing decent golf. Like, you can find shots gained metrics on players in this range that are very favorable, guys that gained with the ball striking stats, but maybe lost in the 2 short game categories. Or even if they like didn't have like the best shots gained categories, like they're at least decent enough to go out there and play, and they're going to be extremely low owned. So I like that a whole lot. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the lineup construction, but let me see if there's any other questions to go through. Yeah, Corey Connors, bounce back would be appreciated. Yeah, me too, man. I'd love to see it for lineups because I played him quite a bit. I actually thought he might even win this event. Like, it's such a good course fit for Corey Connors that I used him. He gained in the 2 ball striking categories, but lost in the short game. Yeah, perfect bounce back candidate. +2, so played horrible, right? Based on the comments that we've seen. I'm going to use him. And by the way, recognizing those kind of things, it was like what the field is most likely to do is key to getting ownership projections correct, but also key to trying to find an edge for any given slate. Niemann for a bounce back, I like it. Just first off, I thought he should have made a lot more birdies today. His ball striking could have been a lot better off the tee. He lost 3 strokes in that category. The putter was slightly positive, but a lot of his birdie putting did not go that well today, and he made a lot of his par putts that he had on the back 9. So if you see 14, he actually bogeyed, he hit it into the water, didn't take advantage of 15, despite being greenside in 2, and hit a ball out of bounds on hole number 7, which was the easiest hole that you had in round number 1. So Joaquin Niemann, definitely a good bounce back candidate, and just has to avoid the blow up holes, which mostly happened because of that off the tee play. And he is a very stout player when it comes to the driving. Let's see. Not sure if I spoke on Cantley already, but his stats look awful. Yeah, if the stats look awful, then it was probably just a bad day. And because it's an 18-hole sample size, that's normally what I chalk it up to. And his shots gained profile actually wasn't that bad. It was mostly losing around the green. He was about a neutral in the other 3 categories. It was a bad around the green day, just a sloppy day in general. And him shooting +3, this was like by far the worst score that he could have possibly shot. If this is his floor, then that actually makes me excited about Patrick Cantlay. And I can tell you for a fact that Patrick Cantlay will be in my player pool. I haven't built it yet, but I was just watching him play today, and he had moments of brilliance. He was on one of the ESPN Plus groups, able to follow a lot of his rounds. He showed me enough to go out there and get to a bounce back. What would my odds be on Rory missing the cut? He's probably going to make it 65-70% of the time, if not more than that, I would say. In fact, I like defaulting to Data Golf because they have a really good made cut model, at least compared to what I've seen elsewhere. And they've got them at about 60% made cut rate. So not quite as bullish as my 65%, but yeah, about there, what I would say. What are my thoughts on Higo? Seems like a trap for Showdown, but his upside is tempting. I like Higo because he just signed with Malbon. So he's actually the newest Malbon ambassador, and I'd love to see him make the weekend and be in contention. He gained a bunch off the tee on approach. I don't know if I'd say he's chalky. He will be a little popular because he's T20, but I could see myself getting into it. I've got to see the ownership where I end up getting him in terms of the ownership number when it's all said and done. If there are some guys around him that are a little bit chalkier, like let's say some guys that are in the top 10 after the first round, I have to look at the pricing dynamic, then Higo might be the move. And in fact, we can kind of get an idea right now together. Let's see. Sorry. So I don't want to actually look him up. I need to see the guys that are around him in the pricing. Let's see. So he's $6,400, I believe. At $6,400, you've got this Penn guy. He's a DP World Tour player. I probably butchered his last name. I don't care. Rayo Satune -3. Tom McKibben -2. So I don't think he'll be like mega chalk or anything because he's $6,400. No one in this range is going to be super chalky, but he might be like 4% owned in GPPs. So if you're really chalky up top and you're counting on your guy down low to get you that differentiation, maybe you go to somebody else just because of that. But if you have a relatively balanced lineup and you're only down here at $6,400 because you're leaving salary on the table or because you want to open up salary up top, then yeah, use a Garrett Higo all you want, because if it's not the differentiation that you have to have in this range, then I think that he's one of the better plays that you'd have at this portion of the board. So I'm not against that at all. Definitely not doubting a Brooks bounce back. There's a reason he has 5 majors. Exactly, right? And it's the same thing with a Rory. He just won the Masters. Same thing with Xander. +1 was actually a little bit better than average even for Xander Schauffele. He could go out there and have a nuke day. So keep that same idea with a lot of guys in the field. Jakara settled in. He started +3 through 4 holes. Ooh, good point. I didn't realize he heated up towards the end there, so that's good to know. Deep dive Rahm for sure. John Rahm, by the way, he had a schizo back 9. He had birdie bogey like almost every other hole. So this is it was his front 9, but it was his back 9 today because he started on the back side. He gained to the putter and he gained to the ball striking category. So it's a shots gained profile that's a little bit better than average just because he was a good ball striker today. The short game, though, not necessarily due for regression. So, I wouldn't say that he's like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 when it comes to the shots gained profile, but a solid 6.5, 7 because he's got that shots gained ball striking that we were hoping for. So, yeah, give me some John Rahm, especially because he looked dialed in and confident today. That back 9, though, just I really hope that he can get that straightened out because he made a lot of birdies. He just his around the green play was erratic to say the least. Cam Smith +7, didn't like him, but didn't see that coming either. Me neither. I didn't play him this week. He is one of my guys, though, one of my favorite players out there. So I kind of wish he would have played better. He says, if I remember correctly, we don't play Donkey Chalk unless we do. That's one of my favorite quotes from DGen75, by the way. Hopefully James is doing well. Prayers to him, of course, as per usual. And yeah, that's exactly true because sometimes there is chalk that's worthy playing. In Showdown, there's a little bit less chalk worthy playing, I would say. I do it a little bit less often. I'm not sure exactly James's take on that, but I assume it's the same. He's always talking about getting different, especially embracing chaos in Showdown too. So yeah, it's there's always exceptions to the rule. You always got to add the asterisk. Who would my last man in be at 7,600 on DraftKings? You're stuck between Wyndham and Zalatoris. So let's compare the two real quickly. So Wyndham today made some birdies. He was all over the place, though, with the ball striking. And then Zalatoris was the exact opposite. He was birdie-free today and then only had 1 bogey on the round. That's a tough one, man, because the ownership is low on both. They both had middling rounds, just kind of did it in different ways. I'm inclined to say Wyndham Clark just because he's also a higher birdie percentage player than Will Zalatoris. I'd say Wyndham Clark just because he has more upside. He's a hotter putter than you have with Willie Z, but I still think Willie Z is a good play too, just kind of in a different way. You don't really play Willie Zalatoris because of the upside of him. You play him because of the long-term talent level, because we know that at one point he was a top 5 player on the tour. He had the injuries. He's still trying to return to that level again, but every once in a while we see it from Will Zalatoris again. So he's I don't know. I always take shots on him. It's because I like the kid too. Do I have a particular 9 that I'd rather have guys starting on? Not off the top of my head, but let's look at it. I'd say the front 9. So looking at this right here, because 8, especially 7 and 8 are both scoreable holes. I mean, yeah, I guess you could go 7, 8, 9, but in theory, the 8, 9, 10 equity of getting a streak there. 9's really tough to make a birdie on, though, so I really don't think it's going to make a big difference. But if I had to choose between the two, I would say guys starting on 1 just so that you have 10 at the bookend of 8 here. Because if you start on 10, then you don't have that same kind of scenario, right? So maybe guys starting on 1, but hole number 9 was only birdied 6% of the time today. So it's only going to make a difference to a select number of players. So probably not something that I would actually use to build a player pool around, but a good nugget to throw out there at least. Shaping up to be a single-digit winning score on Sunday. I hope it is, man, but a -7 winning after round 1 makes me doubt that just a little bit. I hope that you're right, though. Gary Woodland, other than the triple and the 3 6-footers for Bird, yeah, man, right? Brutal with the short stick today. I think he's a decent bounce back candidate, right? If you look at the shots gained metrics, let's go to the right tab and do so. We mentioned it a little bit earlier, but gained both off the tee and on approach, but lost short game. Yeah, I've been a big proponent of them all live stream, and not going to back down from that. Let's talk about some of the contests that are available next. So if you have any player deep dives, I will get to those here in just a few minutes before we wrap this thing up. But let's go through a few of the contests to show you the best payout structures for the next round. So the first few that come to mind would be these single entries. This one is a little bit more top heavy than usual though. So normally this long drive, this is the $100 single entry that we have on DraftKings. It's normally closer to 20% to first place. Now it's a little bit, it's actually not terrible. It's what, a sixth to first place, a little bit better than 20% to first place. But the best contests that you can find for these single entries aren't the ones that are 20% to first. It's the ones that are 10 or even 15% to first place. So while this isn't a terrible contest with it's close to about 18% to that first place slot, it's not ideal though. So let's see if we can find any better single entries that they have out there. So they have a 10K one here. This one, you do a 15% to first place. So it is slightly better in terms of the payout structure. And the reason why we say that is because when you have a lower payout to first place or a lower percentage-wise payout out there to first place, is you end up making the payout structure a lot flatter. Second through fifth place, even like 6 through 10, end up getting a better payout than you otherwise would. Whereas if you had 30% to first place, where it was 3,000 of this $10,000 player pool, you're only going to have peanuts out here for like 5 through 10. So that's why you want to enter those kind of contests, so that even when you don't have the absolute nuts, you're still getting a payout for it. Because like, for example, in this 30K long drive, you finish in the top 5 and you're winning over $1,000. That's over 10xing on your entry. You'd feel great about that. Whereas to finish in the top 10 of like the big $5 GPP for tomorrow, which is this 40K drive the green here, which I don't think is a terrible contest, but it's a lot harder to finish in the top 5. If you do, you're going to get a similar payout for third or fourth as what you're going to get in the other contest. And you're playing against like 20, 30 times the entries. And if not more, 50 to 100 times the entries is what you have in the other single entry contests. So that's why you want to take a look at some of those other payout structures. This one, though, I will say for a large field GPP, I'm going to 150 max this one, in fact, because it is a eighth to first place, because it's about like 12.5% to first place. It's much more stomachable from the payout structure than what they typically have, because normally for round 2 showdown, we have something closer to like 20, 25% to first place, which makes the payouts for the rest of the top 5, top 10 exactly like you have in the other contests, right? Not enough for having the non-nuts performance. So I'll probably 150 max that contest. Let's see, what do we have in the big $25 for tomorrow? That one is a little more top heavy. So it's $25 and a 150 max. So a lot more to max enter that. So I probably won't go with it. It's a little bit over my current bankroll size for what I play on DraftKings, but this is also a fourth to first place. So rather than an eighth to first place, at 12.5%, this one is exactly 25% that you have to first. So the byproduct of that is that it has a nice, really big prize pool that all the casuals want to play in. But if you don't finish in first or second, then your payout isn't really all that much different than having a good lineup in the large $5 GPP. So that's why I focus on those contests personally. But outside of that, it's a lot of single entries for me. I already showed you the big $100 single entries, but the $33, the $12 single entries that they post for these rounds also have flat payout structures. And they've got a lot of contests on here. So I'm having a tough time actually finding those contests I was looking for. Let's see. So is this the $12 albatross? Yeah, this is the $12 that I was just mentioning there. And you can see it's 10% to first place. So that's an even better payout structure than some of the other ones that we were going through before. But let me see if I can find the 33, because I already know they have that one posted. That's this one right here. And it's 10% to first place. So these kind of contests are the most sustainable ones long-term, because, you know, when you hit one of these top 5, top 10s, that can sustain your bankroll for a couple weeks, or at least 3-4 slates from the showdown street purposes. So that's what I do. That's how I try and make this something I can do long term and actually make money doing it. Because, you know, the ones with a lot of rake, where you try to find the lower rake contests too, that's another thing I do with a lot of those contests that I enter, is that's a key doing this long term. And, you know, you can enter the big lotteries if you want, the ones where sure it's like 50K to first. Like I said, it's going to draw in a lot of the casuals that are just clicking on the golf lobby. These other contests though are where you can actually make a lot more positive and consistent long-term ROI. In terms of building lineups, though, let's talk about the strategy involved when actually clicking names, which is mostly coming down to getting leverage. And we've mentioned the fact that is an 18-hole sample size. You want to really get, you know, embrace that variance whenever you can. I'm going to do that even with the starter players up top. So I'm going to start with a Rory McIlroy as my first spend up. I'm not expecting him to be low owned compared to the other guys around him, but I don't think he's going to be anywhere near as chalky as what he was for main slate because he's there at T98. Our next man in, let's go with Shane Lowry. I know we had the question about that one before, but let's use those two just to kind of humor that kind of a lineup construction together. Next up, let's throw in a Russell Henley. I know Henley looked terrible today, but no one's going to use him at $8,000. So he'll be another piece of leverage that we're mixing in there. Let's throw in a Robert McIntyre, a Wyndham Clark at $7,400. At $7,200, let's throw in Kurt Kitayama. And then pretty much no matter who you would use at $6,800 here, because all 5 of these players are low-owned pivots, and literally all of them are. Like Kurt Kitayama, sub 10%. Wyndham Clark will be sub 10% for sure. Same thing with the Russell Henley. Lowry might be close to 10% ownership, I'd say. Rory might be close to 20%. As I said, I don't think he's really going to be that lowly owned. But because Henley, Clark, Kitayama are all pivots towards the middle to the bottom end of the board, even if our last guy here was the chalkiest possible player, you'd get away with it in the large field GPPs. Now, if you really wanted to make sure that you have more leverage and even better chance of not duplicating yourself, go to a pivot as your last man in and make it 6 pivots across the board. You could even leave some salary on the table. So there's no rule that says that you have to spend $6,800 just because you have that left. And if you go down here to like $6,600 and then throw in a pivot at that kind of price tag, then you're going to have even more leverage and even lower chance of duplicating yourself in those large field contests. And even if you wanted to use an Echeverria, so still take some ownership with that guy that you're leaving $200 on the table with, you're still going to have enough leverage by leaving that $200 to get away with using that kind of player down low. So it's not who you play, it's how you play them that really matters out there in builds. And even if you're not as different up top, so rather than going with that really low owned build up top, let's start with a Scotty Scheffler, who's I think going to be like 25 to 30% owned. I haven't ran my projections, so I don't have an exact number for you guys quite yet, but that's kind of what I'm expecting. Let's throw a Victor Hovland in there at $8,500. Because he's T20, I also think that he'll be getting a little bit more steam than some of the other players we took in that other lineup. And in this 7K range, now this is where we're going to get different. So we're not going to take chalk across the board. If you go with that chalkier start, that really makes this 3rd and 4th man in a spot where you have to force in some lower owned pivots, because like players 5 and 6 are always going to be relatively low owned. So we're not going to have to worry about that when we get to that portion of the board. But our 3rd and 4th man in here are where we could, take chalk, especially if we weren't really careful about who we play in this range. And because we weren't taking slightly lower owned guys with our 1st and 2nd man in, it's really important that we don't take those super high owned players here. So I'm going to throw in a Patrick Reed for a bounce back. Actually, I like a Sungjae Im after him not making a lot of birdies on the easy holes. Next up, I'll also throw in a slightly lower owned player. So no Steven Yeagers, no Ryan Foxes that shot -4 that are going to be pretty popular. Let's throw in a David Puig, who's a high birdie player. He's a good par 5 scorer, an extremely aggressive player that we have out there on the PGA Tour, and that can go after some pin locations. So we'll use him for some leverage. We'll throw in another pivot in the 6K range. So trying to avoid like Aaron Rai, who's going to be a little bit more popular at -4. And it doesn't have to be a guy over par that you're playing in all your different spots here. In fact, let's throw it in Eric Van Rooyen. He also has really good form, nearly winning a few weeks ago. If it weren't for Scotty Scheffler shooting -30, Eric Van Rooyen would have won the Byron Nelson out there just a few weeks ago. But this kind of lineup, we've got 3 guys in the top 30. So 3 guys with pretty decent form, 2 pivots at that sort of placement, and pretty much no matter who you used as your last man in here. So the same thing as what we had in the other lineup that we built. You're going to be okay as long as your last man in here isn't mega chalky. And I'd say Noren Højgaard, you might even still be able to play those guys and get away with it. But if you avoided the -3s at $6,700 to also post in down at that same sort of score, then you're for sure going to be fine when it comes to that ownership angle. So I do this to show you guys the perspective and what you should be thinking about when hand building some lineups. I do a lot of this with my optimizer, so I don't really have to think through this process every single time that I'm building lineups. You can do it by setting a cumulative ownership cap. That's not what I do. I do it by setting a product ownership cap. So that's where you multiply all of your ownership numbers together, get an idea of exactly the chance that a lineup is going to use that set of players. And I set a cap for that, right? I try and make sure that depending on the contest that I'm entering, that I've got less than one theoretical dupe out there per contest, which is a different topic for another live stream. That would take probably 30 minutes to go over on its own. But the way that I set it up, and it's not that hard to kind of think through how you could do this for yourself, is that I set up my product ownership cap so that in theory, only one lineup should have that exact set of players. So you do 1 over the total amount of entries, and that gives you the exact product ownership number that I want to have as my maximum. If you want to be really sure about it and make sure, like absolutely certain that you don't have any duplicates, then you could do like half a duplicate, right? I don't only want up to a half a duplicate out there in every single lineup and do it that way. So that's a way to do it with an optimizer. We talked about how to do it here by hand, which a lot of you watching this live stream probably will be building a lot of your lineups by hand. But if you have an optimizer, you can make the optimizer do a lot of that work for you. So again, you can set caps depending on the kind of optimizer that you have access to. You can set roles, make sure that you're only having so many chalky players from your player pool. And even if I have a role, a cap set on my ownership, like I do for a lot of different slates, I'll oftentimes set roles as well. So I'm not taking like a set of 3-4 chalky guys together. So for example, like maybe it's still below my product ownership because of the pivot plays that my optimizer will like force in with like my 5th, 6th man in. But to make sure that I don't have like a core of 4 guys up top that are all going to be like 15% owned, I'll set a role, especially if I have like 4 guys in my player pool that are chalky for showdown, to not play those 4 guys together, because oftentimes the guys that are chalk for showdown are the best projections on the slate. And especially for round 4 showdown, round 4 showdown is highly correlated with your placement position because you have those in play for Sunday. Obviously, your regulars know this, but maybe if you're new to PGA DFS, you don't know that about round 4 showdown yet. You do have that placement point aspect. When that's the case, you have to keep that in mind when you're building projections and building your player pool as well. So keep that in mind as well. Where we leave off with questions, by the way, shaping up to be, let's see, Gary Woodland. And what's the strategy for single entry? Yeah, so for single entry, just to get back to that lineup construction segment, you can be a little bit more lenient, I would say. So if you're tailoring what we just went through for single entry, trying to take it from like the large field GPPs to something a little bit smaller, is you don't have to be as different. So for example, like going through the product ownership case and me trying to make sure I only have like 1 theoretical duplicate, in a smaller field contest, a single entry, for example, we only have like 200 entries. That means that I would have much more leniency allowed in my model, because 1 over 200 is a much larger number than 1 over like 10,000, like you'd have for like a 10,000 entry GPP. So that's like how in practicality it works out when I'm building my lineups, is that when I'm building like my single entries, that metric for the chalk that I'm playing is just a lot larger than what I have for those large field GPP lineups. So good question, but that's how it changes. It's just trying to build and trying to beat the amount of people that you're playing against. You're playing against 10,000 people, you've got to have the nuts. You're playing against like 5 people, like you have in some of those smaller, like higher entry pools, then you don't have to think about ownership at all. You kind of play it like a cash contest. So great questions though down there from the chat. That's all I've got, guys. Best of luck out there with your round 2 exposure. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs. At 10 p.m. Eastern time, I'm going to be going through all the prop and betting stuff for round 2 at this event. So if you guys are playing on sites like Underdog and Prize Picks, matchups on sports books, that kind of thing, make sure to check out my YouTube channel later on. It'll be LukeDFS, again, at 10 p.m. Eastern time, going through all of that stuff for round 2's action. So round number 1 ended up being a decent day for our props, but now we have all the stat averages from today's action, and I'm hyped up about getting into the round 2 stuff. So make sure to check out my YouTube channel for all of that later on. For the round 2 showdown projections, make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation Stone. They're going to have all of that for you. Maybe even now, I have to check over there in Discord whether they posted that quite yet. But here shortly, if not quite yet, they're going to have all those projections for you guys. And of course, over there on my Patreon page, I'm going to have those projections for all of my members as well, too. So make sure to join up at both of those sites to get all of the behind the scenes content and all of the projections for tomorrow's slate. That's all I've got, and best of luck for tomorrow, guys.